Good morning and welcome to our Online Data Quality Control Day 2. It's September 19th and I'm Jennifer Staffner. I'm the Director in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. And with me today I have
Helen Jones, and I'm the Program Manager in the Division of Assessments, Accountability, and Support. Thank you guys for joining us.
We also have Pam Powers here. She's a consultant in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support, taking your questions at dacinfo@education.ky.gov. We are so excited for us today to begin this day 2 of our quality control steps. We have multiple people that we have to thank for putting this day on. You see Helen and I and others here on the broadcast with you, but there's many others that make this day happen, including under the leadership of Kevin Hill, John Wickheiser, and Mike Prater, who are always wonderful to work with as we develop the data and get the data files. Also in their team, we have Mike Henderson, Eric Gray, Robert Davis, and David Curd, who make wonderful things happen within the data and present the files in a way that are simple, easy to understand, as well as trying to make this complex system easy to understand and analyze the data. We also have special thanks to Nathan Rome, Jill Darbyshire, and Chris Williams for their work on the SDRR, as well as the data discrepancy sheets and the checklist that you will be utilizing today. Under Helen's leadership, we have Jenny Larkin, Shara Savage, Kevin O'Hare, Jason Howard, Joy Barr, and Pam Powers, who are always willing to go above and beyond to check our presentations, to make last-minute changes, to send special DAC emails, and they make the work here very, very pleasurable and quality efforts to put on. We also have support staff of Tammy, Elizabeth, and Kim are here to support you, take your calls as always, and also Michael Hackworth and Roger Irvin in our leadership office. Michael's been here on the broadcast with us, and Roger's working diligently to create a media packet for the upcoming release. We also have our own Associate Commissioner, Rhonda Sims, who provides wonderful leadership, and we appreciate all of them that make this happen, because we're on screen with you, but there's a lot of work that is done behind the scenes, and we thank all of our staff who are so wonderful to work with and make a great team. We also appreciate you being here for this Quality Control Day 2. We have a lot to get to. The purpose of today is on the first thing on the agenda, as well as looking at preliminary data cautions and embargo status. We have cut scores that we're going to share with you for both the indicators and the stars, some information about the federal classifications, reporting next steps, and then the Quality Control Day materials and procedures. And along the way, we'll stop for any questions that you may have. So let's talk about the activities for our Quality Control Day 2. So the purpose of today is, again, to ensure accurate reporting toward our public reporting. We want to identify any statewide systemic issues that could potentially impact multiple schools. So as DACs, you are going to look at your data from your schools and districts for those big systemic issues. Last time on our Quality Control Day 1, we did find an issue with our alternate assessment cut scores in our growth calculation. So that was a systemic issue that was found on Quality Control Day 1 and has impact to not only the school and the district of the DAC that found it, but also multiple other districts. So you're going to see that update today. Today's purpose, again, is to review the data and conduct one final review of data to ensure that quality for our schools and districts, because we know it's so important as we go out with the star ratings for the first time. So changes to individual student data were made through SDRR and requested through that application previously. And we also had changes that allow district to take one additional look at our student data and make changes on day 1, as well as find the systematic issues. So today, on day 2, schools and districts will receive the preliminary star ratings, indicator labels from very high to very low, overall accountability scores, and those federal classifications of ATSI and CSI. Additionally, the labels for each of our indicators, as well as the scores for proficiency, growth, separate academic, transition readiness, and our graduation indicator. Now, our student listings will include both the Lexile and Quantile measures. I believe that's a new piece of information that you will receive today. The graduation cohort data, transition readiness data, as well as performance levels of NAPD by both assessed by grade, accountable, and accountable by grade. You'll also receive the accountability summary, and Helen's going to talk with you about an accountability calculator. We know that our district assessment coordinators like to be able to calculate their own accountability scores and create scenarios throughout the year that will help in planning for the upcoming school year. So we do have that calculator thanks to the great data team that have created that calculator, and we are excited to be able to share that with you today. You'll also see in the data any changes that resulted from the QC Day 1. So again, there were changes from the alternate assessment. There were also some issues with our transition readiness data that was found, and those will be updated too. You are going to see a list of changes. So Helen's going to talk with you about the changes that were made, and the data team have brought together all of the changes into one file so that you don't have to look for those data changes in the student listing or the summaries. So you will see very clearly in through one file what the changes were and where you could locate them, and then the impact, if it had any impact on the indicator. Now, I do want to mention to you that this is preliminary. The data you are about to see is preliminary, so we want to make sure that you understand that things could change. So we encourage you to share your information and your data with your superintendent and other district leaders, but it's critical to maintain the fact that it is preliminary and could change. So the people that you share this with need to understand that it's not the final data. Only when we get to the embargo period prior to public reporting, then it becomes final. So again, just want to put that very, very strong caution to you that this is an issue that we're looking forward to. Even if you don't find changes, other district assessment coordinators may find changes that could impact your overall rating. So please push that caution around the people that you share that information with. We do plan to report public reporting in late September or early October. At that point, school and district staff may share with the other school level staff and district staff, and then with the local media. So we'll talk through that in just a moment. So again, in that public embargo period, that we would ask you at that point not to continue to share in public in any way. So just a brief overcap of the accountability. Today you will see your star ratings for the first time, that overall accountability score that the star rating was based on, data components for each of the indicators, as well as the federal classification of ATSI, that's additional targeted support and improvement, and comprehensive support and improvement. I will note for you again that the quality of school climate and safety indicator is coming in the 1920 school year, so you will not see information on climate and safety, but you will have that. We're working toward that indicator for the 1920 school year. Just a reminder of the accountability weights that were approved by the Kentucky Board of Education, and with that 4% at the quality of school climate and safety not being included in accountability this year, it redistributes proportionally to the other indicators. So when you are looking at your overall accountability weights, the numbers on the screen past the decimal point were included in the calculation. Although we will report to 1 decimal past one place past the decimal, we do utilize all the numbers on the screen to calculate the overall accountability. In the calculator, if there is a indicator that is missing, it will automatically redistribute. So you don't have to worry about adjusting your weights proportionally, because the calculator will do that for you. The final indicator cut scores are on the screen for you. Again, we've been talking about from very low to very high. So each of the indicators receive an indicator score. So if you, for an indicator, for example, of proficiency, if your school had a score of 45, then that would be very low. If it had a score of 65, then it would be low, and so forth throughout the range from very high to very low on the cut scores. Now you'll notice that growth is a high level of 300. It is a possibility to get 300 out of that growth table. It's highly unlikely. However, you can see from the context of very high to very low where the standard setter group of panelists that came together did set those different cut points. So you'll notice that the performance, you may recall that the standard setting panelists, we went through an in-depth explanation over pre-QC Day 1. On that Tuesday, September 10th, we went through a really in-depth discussion about how these cut scores were set. So the panelists looked at data, looked at frequency data, we looked at percentiles and how schools perform and how students performed within those. So you can see and get an idea of where the performance is. Rhonda uses an example that helps with putting these into context. Because when you think of a score of 77, if you look at the high school, if that in proficiency, a score of 77 is very high. However, if you think about 77 in a graduation rate, that's quite low. So these labels of very high, high, medium, low, and very low help put those index scores for the indicators into context. That gives meaning to these scores that you are receiving in each of these indicators. For the overall cut scores, for the stars, you'll see on the screen what the overall score would rate if it were the school were to earn a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star. Now you may notice that the ranges on the 5-star go up to 188.8 in elementary, middle, and 123.5. That's due to our calculation and the formulas being used. So we did want to be really transparent in sharing with you the top level of the scale. So you may get some questions about that, but we did want to be very clear what that very top range is on the 5-star rating. So you could see, once you receive your overall score, where you fall into each of those levels. So for example, at an elementary school, if you had a 77, you would know that that was at the very top range of a 4 or a 78. Whereas if you received a 71 for a 4-star rating, you would be at that low edge. So you can see along those ranges where your schools fall, as far as if they're low in that range for the star or higher in that range for a star rating. So let's give some examples here. So because it's a formula, it's going to be, schools are going to earn the star ratings in different ways. So there's not going to be really one way to get a 4-star rating or a 5-star rating, but there's different ways, because the formulas and the weights that the Kentucky Board of Education set is, it's just a formula, and depending on where your school falls, you could get differences in the profiles of performance across the schools that would get the school to those different cuts. in those areas. So let's take a couple of examples for our high school. To receive a 5-star rating, School 1, and these are actual high school performances. So to get to a 5 stars, both of these schools have a 5-star level rating. However, their performance is quite different. You'll notice that proficiency in School 1 is very high. Well, so is proficiency in School 2. But then the differences come when we get to separate academic, because School 2 is very high, but School 1 is medium on separate academic. Transition is high and very high. And then the big difference again is graduation, where their graduation was medium and their for School 1 and very high for School 2. Both overall scores fall within the range of 5 stars, but the school got there in vastly different ways. The middle school, again, is a 5-star level, and here's two quite different schools. So looking at their proficiency is very different. Though School 1 is medium proficiency, where School 2 is very high. Their separate academic is high and very high. But then look at growth. That the growth for School 1 is very high, but the growth for School 2 is low. So you'll notice that both of these, again, are 5-star schools. So there's multiple different ways to get to the different levels of star ratings. An elementary example of proficiency in School 1 is low, but in School 2 is very high. Separate academic is medium for School 1, but high for School 2, and then growth is high and very low for School 2. So these profiles of performance led to an overall score that would result in a 3-star level. So again, there's multiple different ways to be rated at those 5 stars. So when you get to digging into your data, it tells more of a story of the performance in that school system of the different indicators. Let's talk now about the federal classifications. We have 2 federal classifications that for 1920. As you all watched Commissioner Lewis or the recording yesterday, you will recall that for fall 2019, KDE will not identify any schools for TSI, that's Targeted Support and Improvement. Those schools that were previously rated as Tier 1 consistently underperforming subgroups. So we will not identify any schools this year for reporting in 1920 for TSIs. So we do anticipate identifying the first round of TSI schools in the fall of 2020. Schools that were identified last fall, and you may recall we had 418 schools that were TSI last year. Those schools that did not exit, that were previously identified as TSI, will and fail to meet the criteria, will remain identified not as TSI, but a TSI. So this is a technical change in the wording for the status. So the schools that were TSI that didn't meet the improvement exit criteria will be identified as a TSI beginning this year. KDE will not identify any new schools for ATSI in the fall of 2019. However, KDE anticipates identifying the second round of ATSI in the fall of 2021. For the identification of CSI schools, schools were identified in the fall of 2018 for CSI, and those that fail to meet the criteria will remain as CSI status. So in addition, KDE is required annually to identify those schools for CSI, and again, those are the lowest performing 5% of schools based on level of the school's performance and the state accountability assessment system. Any high schools with a 4-year cohort graduation rate that is less than 80%, and then schools that identified for ATSI in improvement that fails to exit that status. So the earliest any of the ATSI schools could be identified for CSI is during the 2021-2022 school year. The bottom 5% was at the cut scores for elementary at a 45.0 and below. So on that overall score, if your elementary school had an overall score of 45.0 or below, then your school was identified for CSI, having that bottom 5%. If your middle school was at a 37.3 or below, they will be CSI, and then the 49.6 at the high school or below will be identified for CSI. So that's a lot of information, Pam. Do we have a few questions at this point?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of questions. Let's start with the first one. This is on the cut scores that go from very high to very low. It's about the decimal place. Where would 49.4 on the elementary separate academic indicator fall? Very low or low? So it's a 49.4.
So if it's a 49.4, and Kevin Hill is in the with us, so if it's a 49.4, they would not have met the cut score of the which level, Pam, again?
Elementary.
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 Overall?
Yeah, the separate academic indicator.
Separate activity.
So if you have to meet the cut for
49 was the cut,
Yeah.
49.4 is in both.
I'm looking at Kevin, and Rhonda is here with us. So 49 was the cut for very low. So if it was a 49.4, that would be above that cut. So then it would be low. Thank you for the peanut gallery.
We have the voices from the dark today. Okay, we have another question on slide 13. It's about growth. Why was the middle school growth not topped at 300 like the elementary was? Was this just a typo?
Yes, it was. Thank you for catching that. It should have been. Yes. We will update that and get that back out. Good catch. See, our district assessment coordinators are eagle eyes. So we appreciate that.
Okay, that's all we have for the moment.
Okay. So again, we want to talk through the purpose of QC Day. Again, is to share with you this preliminary data, and the next steps also in reporting is to work through today to identify any systemic issues that we have. And then move into what we call an embargo period. So the next step after today, if we find systemic issues, then those will have to be updated. If we don't, then we can move into what we call the embargo period, where the star ratings, federal classifications, and data that are in their final form will be released to districts. Then it will be released to working media. And then, so at that point, during the embargo period, then our districts can work with the local media to begin to write the stories for public release. Then we'll move into a public release of accountability data. That's when the information will be opened in the school report card. And then at that point, then the final data review, it's a regulatory, mandatory review of the final data that will happen. That's when individual changes can be made to student level, and will happen for 10 days after that public release. And again, we are looking toward the end of September or early October to release those data publicly. So again, when we have the final dates that are in stone, we will share that with you. And we will work with our vendor, Bright Bites, who is developing the school report card on when the school report card can be opened publicly. And so we want first, though, to get that information to you as a district and then to the working media before that is released publicly. So I want to turn now to Helen for some details because there are a few changes that you're going to see in your data today, so we want to highlight those for you.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning again. As Jennifer stated, there are a couple of changes, but we also have some information that will remain consistent. As before, we have your folders in which you will be able to see your data. You will still have your accountable NAPD folders, and that's by level and by grade. You will have the assessed NAPD by level and by grade. You will have the cohort folder, student listing, your summary folder, your transition readiness for the student listing, and then the new calculator folder is also here as well. Now this is only just at the district only levels, as well as the information and the changes that may have taken place from QC Day 1. This is also going to be just at the district level. So we're going to look at those and see what those look like. The data quality procedures. Just like QC Day 1, you to have access to your district preliminary and secure data, you're going to first of all go into the data files. This is on the KDE secure website. You're going to have access to the summary and all of your spreadsheet through this website. So the KDE website application to check the numbers behind the report. Follow the data in the QC, follow the steps in your QC checklist to review your data. So let's get into this. Before, you also had your summary spreadsheet. This is the spreadsheet that we are going to ask that when you get your data, have access to your data, that you go here first. This worksheet, as before, it has a profile tab, but there's a new tab. This is your ATSI tab. This tab will quickly identify your schools that were identified for ATSI. You will have proficiency, separate academic, growth, transition readiness, graduation rate, cohort, your 4-year and 5-year graduation rates, as well as the gap. This spreadsheet summarizes the information for each worksheet. I want to make note on this particular spreadsheet that if you go to some of the data from QC Day 1 was grayed out, so you weren't able to quickly identify that information. But if you go to column H, on this particular spreadsheet, on the profile tab, you will be able to quickly see, well, let's go back. In columns G, H, and I, if you go to G, you'll get your overall score. H is where you will see the number of stars that your school or district were awarded here. And then the star ratings, if it was lowered because you may have had a statistical or significant gap, there will be a check mark here. And then J is going to actually tell you why, which groups were affected by this. K is going to give you your federal classification, where L is going to actually tell you the reason for the federal classification. And as before, you will have all your proficiency indicators. If you met the minimum in count to in number of students to be identified, all of that information will be identified here. So I said ATSI, that's a new tab. So if you have schools that were identified for ATSI, the ones that did not meet the exit criteria, this tab will be here. So you will have a tab on the summary spreadsheet to identify this. You will also still have your proficiency tab as well, separate academic tab as well, growth. And one note that I want to talk about here, and this is going to be for each of your indicators. If growth, for instance, was the reason why you are identified as ATSI, it will be reflected on this tab as well. Again, this is a quick summary of all of your indicators folders. So this is a quick look for the districts to be able to identify whether or not what's going on in your school, your 4-star or 5-star rating, your federal classification. So there's a graduation tab, gap, and again, So your next folders, these are not very different. There were very little changes for these from QC Day 1. So you'll still have the accountable students. The 100-day requirements are still in place. This spreadsheet includes aggregate data for your novice, apprentice, and proficient and distinguished performance percentages of 100-day students. These are reported by demographic groups and for the districts and all schools, all content areas, and all assessed grade level. This folder still also has the assessed students. This spreadsheet includes aggregate data for NAPD performance percentages of all tested students reported by demographic groups for the districts and all schools, all content areas, and all assessed grade levels. These did not change from QC Day 1. Neither did your cohort. Your cohort rates are still the same, so you will have that folder as well, and you'll have cohorts for grades for 4-year graduation and 5-year. You will have the cohort rates and the cohort student listing. This spreadsheet for the student listing includes individual student data for 4-year and 5-year adjusted cohort rate. The student listing spreadsheet folder is also still here, so you will still have the exact same information. This again did not really change. This folder contains 2 worksheets. It's content assessments and assess for EL students. This worksheet includes individual student data for the summative state assessments in all content areas at grades 3 and 8, including data for growth indicators for high school. Data are included for reading and mathematics for the state administered ACT from science and on-demand writing taken at grade 11 and alternate assessment taken at grade 9, 10, and 11. The Assess tab, this worksheet includes individual student data for your assess for the assess for EL exams. You have your student transition readiness student listing. This spreadsheet includes individual student data for academic and career readiness and English language learners. So you will be able to see all of this data today. This is new. So if there was a change at the district level, you will be able to see this quickly here. This spreadsheet includes data that has changed since QC Day 1. So there's a profile and an ATSI tab. This includes this is specific to the district. So if you look at, for instance, column F, there will be a change. It'll say yes or no. Then where it was changed, if the change occurred as a result of proficiency, you will see that. And then if you move over to the individual for proficiency, you will see the change and then what it is currently. So if you look at N and M for proficiency, in column N you will see the original, and then in column N you will see the actual change. And now if this resulted as you being identified as ATSI, this will be reflected in this particular this tab. And then here's the calculator that everyone has been waiting for. This particular calculator, this is a what if. This is an opportunity for the districts to begin the conversations about what can we do and what do we need to do to actually make improvement. This is all about continuous improvement. So you'll have this in the calculator spreadsheet, there's an information tab. There are tables that will include the weights and the growth tables. Then in the final tab, that's where you can actually put the data in. And for each district, you'll be able to have the opportunity to put the data in for your elementary, middle, and high schools to actually see what you need to do next. Okay. Finally, QC Day checklist and data discrepancy report. To begin this process, as before, you will have to complete the QC Day checklist online at the link provided here. You will then submit, once you're done, you go through the steps for the QC Day, and when you're finally done, then you will complete and submit the QC Day checklist. This will indicate to KDE that you have finished your review of the data. If you find discrepancy along the way, we still encourage you to actually make sure you complete those discrepancies. Again, we want to ensure that our data is as clean as possible going forward. This will address any systemic issues in the data. We're still just looking for those systematic issues. This is not the time to start making those individual student changes. So if you find anything in the data that causes you concern, please complete the discrepancy work report day 2 report at the link provided. The passwords for both are still capital, all capital, QC Day, no spaces. To communicate with our staff here, we want you to be able to contact us if you have questions or concerns about the data. The key district communication during QC Day is completing and submitting the data discrepancy report. Again, the focus is on to view the data for systemic issues. Keep in mind, staff will be researching information submitted on the forms in the order in which the forms are received. This will take some time, so be patient with us. It will take time, possibly a few days to complete this process, but you will receive feedback from KDE assessment at education.ky.gov. And here are your contacts for QC Day. If your districts are the following, you're going to call 502-564-2106. And for your staff contacts for Adair through Bowling Green, it's going to be Eric Gray, Boyd through Christian, Mike Henderson, Clark through Eminence Independent, Robert Davis, Erlanger, Ellesmere through Grayson is going to be David Curd. Green through Jessamine County is going to be Pam Powers. If your districts fall into this category, you're going to call 502-564-4394. If your districts are from Johnson to Lyon, is going to be Jason Howard. Madison through Montgomery, Chris Williams. Morgan through Pike, Joy Barr. Pikeville through Southgate, Independent. Jenny Larkins. Spencer through Woodford, Sheriff Savage. Do we have any additional questions?
They have been busy typing. We have several questions that have popped in. So let's start with ATSI.
Okay.
What exactly are the exit criteria for ATSI? The exit cut points released last year don't work anymore because of how growth changed.
So for the exit criteria of for TSI, so what we did is we had schools that were identified previously as TSI. For those schools last year in fall 2018, they had to improve on any of the indicators within that student demographic group that got them identified. So if that student demographic group had an increase in at the elementary, say proficiency, separate academic, or growth, as long as they showed improvement on any of those, then that school would have been exited from TSI status. For those schools that did not have any improvement in that student demographic group for any of those indicators that got them identified for TSI, then those are the schools that will be identified as ATSI. Now, for moving forward, we'll have to work with the Senate bill and through the legislative session on how to exit from the current identification. So the Office of Continuous Improvement, Kelly Foster's office, will be working with the General Assembly on any type of identification, but we do have improvement. They will have to show improvement and will communicate very clearly once that is established. So for the schools that were identified last year as TSI, they had to show improvement on those indicators. If they didn't, they would be identified as ATSI. Then we'll move forward with more communication and training around how to exit then ATSI as we move along.
Okay, we have a question about basically rounding, if a high school has an overall score of 61.1375, would that be a 2-star or a 3-star?
So let me go back here to our overall cut score. So you said high school and what and what level?
Oh, I just closed it.
I think you said 61.
0.1375, something like that.
So, so if you're looking here, so if your scores fall within the ranges of on the slide, then you would be identified in that. So if the score was 61.13, then that would be in the range of 61.
It's a
So
two-star.
it would be a 2-star school.
You'd have to be
Yeah,
at 62.
you would have to be at 62. So the 62 cut, so you would have to be 62.0 or above to get to a star level of 3. So a 61.1375 would be a 2-star school.
Jennifer, Kevin's group will run an updated chart that shows some of this detail, spreading out the decimal.
So
You may need to.
the voice from beyond, Rhonda Sims and Kevin, we are going to update a chart that will put in decimal points in here for you. We've got some decimal points in there, but not all of those. So we will align those out to a decimal point so that it's very clear for you.
Okay. Will the cut scores stay the same next year, or will they be reset?
So at this point, we are hoping to be able to hold these and hold these for a while, and but we do have some changes within the upcoming assessment system. We have a new test in reading and math. And at the high school level, we also have new assessments that will be utilized in our other content areas. So we'll have to go back and do a standard, at least a standards validation, look at the cut scores and see if they continue to align with the methodology that was used during the standard setting. So we anticipate that they will stay the same. But you know, in our world, things do change. So, but we will verify with that.
We've had several people asking the same thing about CSI. Does progress have to be shown in each area, each component area to exit CSI in addition to being out of the bottom 5%?
So yes, to exit CSI, you would have to show improvement on those indicators that you were identified for. So yes, you would have to improve on those if you were identified previously. As you recall, that we have to annually identify. So that's the annual identification is in addition to those schools that did not exit CSI.
And here's a good one. What is the definition of significant growth?
Significant growth? Well, growth is based on the performance of our students in our reading and math. Now, we have a growth value table that is assigned points. So last year in October and November, we brought together a group of education stakeholders that had made recommendations, and we accepted those recommendations on how to calculate growth. Moving from very low to from novice low to novice high is a tremendous effort. Moving from novice low to proficient is a great effort. So it takes a lot to move students within the school, and it's a lot of work both on the student, the teacher, as well as the parent. But as far as significant growth, I don't know that we have that in the system, and we don't have definitions for significant growth.
And do we have any time frame on when we might be giving the data to the media?
We do. We have somewhat of a time frame, and that is at the end of September to the early November. So we're working toward possibly next week or the following week. So next week is the end of September. We're looking toward possibly being able to share the information with districts first, then to media, and then to the public. So again, we're working very diligently with our partners in Bright Bites, that independent vendor that is going to display the accountability system in the school report card. We are anticipating that happening at the very last of September or the early first week of October. As soon as we get those dates and that confirmation from Bright Bites, we will share those and be very specific. But first, we've got to get to the activities of today to make sure that we don't have to get have any systemic issues. So at this point, do you have any further questions?
We have another one.
Okay, great.
Will we have another webcast this afternoon, or how will you announce any systemic issues that were found?
That's a great question, and one way that we can end on. We will not have an update at 1 o'clock or 1:30 the way that we did previously. We are anticipating that we will have a very good QC day, and we are going to provide an email at the end of the day at 4 o'clock for you to share any systemic issues that are found. So again, today is about finding those systemic issues in our data, and please complete the quality control checklist as well as any discrepancy sheets that you will find. We will get back with you on those. It may not be today that we can resolve the issues, but it may be tomorrow or the next day. But we do want you to work very diligently to help us find any errors in the data, because it is important that we have very clean data for us for public release. So again, we thank you. We encourage you to complete the checklist as well as any discrepancy forms, and look for that email this afternoon around 4 o'clock. Thank you, and we appreciate your efforts for today.